I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Kate Murphy, I just want you to know, I have read gotta be 50 books about communication. Tons of books about especially listening and questioning. And without question, this is the best book on listening I've ever read. It blew my mind. And I was like, I was going to show you my book. It's filled with little red and blue stickies. Now, the red means this is an extremely important quotation. The blue means this is a really important quotation. But it's practical. It's beautifully written. I just love the way you write. And I recommend it to anybody who's interested in improving their relationship with others. And that should probably be everybody. But this is not hyperbole. It's without question the best book on listening I've ever read. It's really a great accomplishment. So I've been really looking forward to the conversation, and in part just so I could tell you how grateful I am for the book. It's really a beautiful piece of writing. So thank you so much, and glad you're going to come to TLC and we get to meet. It's going to be exciting.
Well, I'm very flattered. Thank you so much. That's high praise coming from you.
Oh, it's God's truth. I'm telling you, Malcolm Gladwell has this course on Masterclass about how to teach or how to write, and he says,
I didn't know that.
it's pretty fun. It's kind of a cool thing because I watched it while I was traveling, and I'd be in some airport somewhere with nobody to talk to, so I just opened it up, and there was Malcolm. But one of the things he says you have to give your readers candy. You have to sort of delight them with interesting phrases and bits of information. And your book, as practical as it is, it's filled with candy. I love the way in which you use analogies and similes and really innovative ways. It's really just delightful the way you write. It's there's not much that's anything near a cliche. It's always kind of innovative and exciting. So I loved it.
Well, thank you so much. That really does mean a lot to me. Because I really, whenever I write something, I don't want to waste anyone's time. I don't want them to have to flip any pages to get to the good stuff. So I like to keep people engaged, and more than anything, I like to keep myself engaged. I don't want to be writing anything boring. So that makes me very happy.
Well, it's hard work. I mean, you don't settle for easy. You look for an innovative. Well, this is not where I expected our conversation to go, but I like where we are. You just have cool, well, I hadn't thought of that turn of phrase, or I hadn't thought of that analogy, but that is a really cool way to think of it. And it must be hard work to have that. I don't think it just happens magically. You have to keep pushing until you get the right turn of phrase for the thing. So I loved it, not just because of it listening, but because of its just the style with which it's written. But I have a question up front, which is, before I get started, what advice do you have me on how I can ask better questions in this conversation today? I want to make sure I ask good questions.
Well, I would say just lead with your curiosity. Whatever's really interesting to you will undoubtedly be interesting to other people. And so I really think thinking about what you're going to ask is really not anything you need to do. It's whatever is kind of piques your curiosity. Hey, I'd like to know that. And even if it's off the wall or off topic, you will guide back to where you want to be just by asking that question. Because even when you were talking about keeping things interesting and keeping things engaged, where you're feeling like we were getting off topic about the writing of the book, I have a feeling that's very intimately connected to what you do and what you encourage other people to do, whether they're communicating with colleagues or trying to get to what's unique about a student that will help you teach the student in the best way that gets through to them. A lot of it has to do with coming up with what's engaging, what's interesting, what will capture someone's attention, and meeting them where they are. And that's what I hope to do with readers, and I'm sure that's what you hope to do, and whether it's with people who are teaching or people who are coaching people who are teaching or anybody else.
Well, that's great advice. I love Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger's book, and the narrator, Holden Caulfield, he has this part where he said he was in a class and the teacher, whenever a student would digress, he would say digression and get the student back on track. And Holden Caulfield says, but actually, I thought the digressions were the best part. So I like what you're
Yeah.
saying. It's kind of how I feel. So in part one of your book, or early in your book, you talk about listening as understanding another person's story. So, what's your
Hmm.
listening story? How did you come to write this book? I'm sure you've had to tell this many times, but I'm curious what your story is, how you came to write this book. What was it that provoked it?
That's actually one of the hardest questions. It's what people always ask authors, and for me, it's a very hard question because I feel like my whole life led up to writing the book. There wasn't a moment. As you know, I'm a journalist, and so I listen for a living. So I've always been interested in listening and also really getting to the truth. And to do that, you have to listen to a lot of people and to a lot of people that see things differently. And when I was a little girl, I grew up in the South, and I had fortunately I had some relatives that were really quite raconteurs, really good storytellers. But the thing that was interesting is to go around to different relatives and ask them to tell me the same story. And boy, you got different versions of the truth. So listening to all those different stories carefully was how I got closer to what I think probably happened. So I've always been interested in listening and listening well. And also, it's just brought so much to my life. And that's really why I wrote the book, because I live in the same world that everybody else does. And I see that listening is becoming very much a lost art, whether it's because of culture or technology or just expectations. We are losing our ability to listen. And also, when you were talking about reading a lot of books about communication, there really aren't a lot of books about listening. I mean, there have been more published since I wrote mine, but you can look at the encyclopedia of interpersonal communication, and there's one entry on listening, and it's probably less than 200 words. And this is a 3,000 word, 3 volume encyclopedia. So listening is something that hasn't gotten enough attention, and I would argue it's the more powerful position in communication. Speaking's always thought is more important, but listening is really what gets you ahead. It's how you learn.
It's how you learn. And I think you make this point in the book, and correct me if I've got it wrong, but that it's needed in this time because we're in a time of pretty increasing polarization. And then listening builds connection, real listening is an intimate thing. So, yeah, I was inspired to be a better listener. So I'm working on it today. I'm trying to ask good questions. I'm trying to be a good listener. And this is just to sort of set the stage. I'm not sure this is a question you've been asked many times too, but could you say a little bit more about why listening, what it means to a person to be a better listener? What are the, for lack of better terms of trivializing it, what are the advantages of improving as a listener? Why not just tell? It seems like we're in a time of telling all the time. What's the advantage of listening?
Well, you already know what you know. So if you're doing all the talking, you're not learning anything. It's one way. You're not improving, growing, understanding, connecting while you're talking. People think that they are, but they're really not. That the only way that they connect with another person is to understand them. And the only way to understand them is to listen. And listening is essential to all of our relationships, professional or personal. It's how we fall in love. It's how we are able to cooperate, how we're able to be creative, how we're able to again learn. So it's essential. It's essential to being a good person.
It seems to me, and I'm following my curiosity here, so I'm going away from my
Uh-huh.
list of questions, but
Good.
it seems to me, um, when you think about trust, what erodes
Hmm.
trust is self-interest. If I think it's all
Yes.
about me, if the other person thinks it's all about me, they're probably not going to trust me. But if they think I have an attitude of benevolence towards them, there's a greater likelihood they'll trust me. And it seems like
Right.
real listening is a way of, it's a selfless act. but paradoxically, it leads to a better relationship. It's it's good for you, even though it might seem selfless in the act. So, um, I don't know.
Well,
Uh, Go ahead.
that's what I tried to do in the book is that listening isn't, we tend to think of it as being submissive. You're listening and the other person's doing all the talking and they're at center stage, they're getting all the attention. But, and you are right, listening is the greatest gift you can give to another person. But the thing I think that we also lose is the benefit side of it. Not only is it this great gift, but in order to be an effective, engaging, entertaining speaker, one that is able to get people to do what they want them to do, they have to first front load that with listening. The people that are the most compelling, the most wonderful speakers that I've ever heard are the ones that have listened first. They know their audience and craft their message to reach the people that they are speaking to. And so not only do you get a better understanding of the other person and give them that gift of being felt and heard and understood, you also are better able to reach them when you need them to understand you, or you want them to cooperate and connect with you because you know their level of understanding. You know what may set them off, what their tender points are. So listening it's not only a gift, but it's also a great benefit. It's a great advantage.
It is strange, paradoxical in a way that telling people what you want isn't as effective as listening. And
Absolutely.
real power comes from compassion more than force. You know, it's very very interesting. So I have a thing here. So chapter 5, you've got the great title, "Why People Would Rather Talk to Their Dog." And so I googled this. I did a little research, and I found out that 40% of women in heterosexual relationships say they love their dog or cat more than their partner. So I want to know how could this be true? What can we do to be so as a person in a committed relationship, what can I do to be a better listener than my dog? So that's what I really want to know. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you have the advantage of being able to respond, which the dog doesn't. I mean, beyond the wag of the tail and the deep brown eyes or blue eyes, if it's a certain type of catahoula or whatever collie, or husky or something. But the way people know that you're listening is really in the way you respond. And so if you respond in a way that you're picking up the ball and expanding, I talk in the book about this idea of a shift versus support responses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once people read that, they never look at or hear conversations the same way again, because there was a study done by a Boston University professor who he looked at hundreds of dinner table conversations, recorded them. And he saw that there were basically two types of responses, the shift response versus the support response. And the shift response was 90% of the responses were shift responses. And what the shift response is when somebody redirects the conversation back to themselves. And we all know that when that happens. I give the example in the book that if somebody were to say to you, back to dogs, my dog got away. And it took me 3 days to find him. And so shift response would be, oh, I have a rescue dog. He's always getting out. We don't know what to do with him. We always have to go out with a leash. Okay, then you've shifted it back to you. You've virtue signaled about the rescue dog. It's become all about you. And whereas a support response would be something like, oh my gosh, 3 days? It took you 3 days to find him? Oh, you must have been worried sick. How did that happen? Or how did you finally find them? Where you're listening more from the speaker. And so if you want to be a better listener than your dog, try and find out more. Use that curiosity. Boy, how did you find your dog? Where was he for 3 days? Tell me that story. And in the process of hearing that story, you learn a lot more about that person, what was going on in their life when the dog got out. You learn so much more. And also, you're identifying, gosh, that must have really scared you to death. And you learn so much more about the person. And again, you'll be able to use that intelligence the next time you're talking to that person because you find out what's important to them, what's going on with their life. So when you are talking to them about something that has to do with you, you're able to shape that conversation, deliver that message in a way that resonates with the other person. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. It's got me thinking. I'm wondering why we do that. I mean, the obvious answer would be we do it because of ego. I want to be the center of
Mm-hmm.
attention. But I wonder too if it's kind of fear. I don't want to lose control of the conversation, or even maybe I don't want to feel any. I've got enough pain of my own. I don't want to carry your pain around too. So let's move it back to me. So it's interesting. It probably is self-centeredness, but again, one of those ironies that by being self-centered, you probably don't serve yourself very well.
Well, I think you've touched on a lot of really good points. And I do want to emphasize that my book is not a finger wagging book. I mean, the title
No.
is You're Not Listening, but it's what you're missing and why it matters. And it's all of us, including me. And it's really, it's something that we all need to work on. And I think we need to have a lot of compassion for ourselves along with other people who aren't listening because of exactly the things that you brought up. Things like it takes quite a bit of courage to listen because you don't know what you're going to hear. And people can, from my many years as a journalist, boy, there's, people can lay a lot on you, which you may not be prepared for. So there is some courage and some sense of inner resources that I can handle this. And I think part of that fear comes from, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to respond to it if they say something. But that's the beauty of listening is people don't really want you to fix, correct, advise, do all those things that we naturally do.
Mm-hmm.
They just want you to hear them and understand where they're coming from. So that takes care of that fear. But there also is the ego thing. Look at me, 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 me. But there's also this sense that people want to connect. And so they want to say, hey, I'm like you. Let me show you how I'm like you.
Mm.
And unfortunately, nobody's like you. Or actually, fortunately, nobody's like you. And so when people do that, oh, you're just like me, when someone says something like that, kind of makes you recoil. Like, no, you're not like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so to find out what is unique about one another and that it's okay if you're not like that other person, they're still going to like you. And in fact, they'll like you a whole lot if you listen to them. That's the thing. That's the thing that makes people like you is when they feel like you care, which you brought up earlier. It's your generosity. You're curious, you're interested, and you're not going to judge them. You just want to hear their story.
I love it. You've been kind of answering this question already, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I'm trying to visualize a good listener. So, if
Mm-hmm.
you were to describe someone who's a good listener, what do they do that makes them a good listener, in addition to what you said? And, what would they look like? What would they be doing? What would it look like to have a conversation with someone who's really a great listener?
Well, see, that's the thing. It's more, what does it feel like?
Mm-hmm.
Because you know when someone gets you. You know what it feels like. And a lot of this is going on underneath the hood. I talk about it in the book about that neural matching that we do when there's that moment of understanding between the listener and the speaker. They've shown, it's Yuri Hassan out in Princeton showed me he did fMRI scans of listeners and speakers. And when there was that moment of connection, when there was that moment of understanding, the neural patterns, the brain waves of the listener and the speaker actually synced up. So it was actual visual proof of that magical moment that you feel when someone really is listening to you. Now, people can give you superficial things that you can do, but you really don't have to act like you're listening if you actually are, and people feel it. Now, of course, we have been talking about there are things that you want to do. You want to ask good questions. You want to elicit things from other people. You want to really be in tune with them, really paying attention and being aware of, okay, what are they not saying? And I do think you shouldn't be looking at your phone, of course. In fact, the phone should be totally out of sight, because there's something about a phone being there. It's like, you know what, if you're not interesting, I've got other options here. I can quick draw this at any moment if you're not interesting enough. And that subconsciously, that's what people pick up, even though that phone is on the table like a piece of the place setting, right next to the fork or the spoon. And it does send that message. It is subconscious, but it does send that message. And research, there's so many studies showing that the mere presence of the phone on the table, even if everyone at the table was told that it was off, they don't share as much. They're not as interesting. They're not as articulate. And it's all because of that phone. So I will say, you don't want to do that. And also the thing I did notice, because as you know from reading the book, I interviewed a lot of what I call the Olympic level listeners, any of the best listeners I can find who, like me, listen for a living: focus group moderators, priests, hairdressers, air traffic controllers, bartenders, that type of thing. But the ones who are really just elite level listeners, I did notice a physicality to them, and they were very open in their posture. They didn't fidget. Their eyes weren't wandering the room. And they were just incredibly relaxed. You had no sense there was anywhere else they needed to go. And there was such a peace about them that made it easier to talk. So that's what I'd say about what a good listener is. It's more felt than done, but there are things that you can do to make it more likely that you are a better listener.
I love that phrase. It's more felt than done. You got this in your book. You said to really listen is to be moved physically, chemically, emotionally, and intellectually by another person's narrative. So, given how positive that is, why is it that we don't listen very much? What's your thinking about that?
Well, I think we've got a lot working against us. I mean, let's just start when we're little kids and someone says, listen to me or listen up. I mean, just even the word listen has negative connotations. Just like I said, we think of submission. Like, oh, my fun's over now. Like, you need to listen. I mean, what's coming next? It's always something you don't want to do.
Right.
So there's that. And then, all through school, we're taught to speak, not really to listen. I mean, there are courses in debate, communication. There are no listening courses. There's no listening club. So there's that. And then, of course, technology is keeping us from listening to each other at all, not only because of the distraction, but I find now even my friends who are in their 20s and certainly teenagers, it's almost like they're all performing for a TikTok video or a YouTube video. Instead of actually engaging with the other person, they're speaking for a camera that's rolling somewhere in their mind. And so I think it's gotten much more difficult to really listen and connect when you've got in your mind, like, how would this play online? There's that. I could go on. I mean, look at just our workspaces. And when's the last time you went to a restaurant and you could actually hear the other person? They're so loud. They're playing so much music. Just even the environments we've created for ourselves make it incredibly difficult to listen. So there's so much going on that's preventing us from listening. And we've already talked about some of the psychological factors of just fear and ego. There's a lot, working against our listening, even though it's what makes for the most wonderful aspects of being a human being. And that's really connecting with another person. And by the way, that neural matching that occurs, when that happens, all of these wonderful feel good chemicals flood our body at that moment. And that's why it feels so incredibly good when you meet that person and you just click. And that only happens when you listen.
Yeah, I think the phone thing, here's an interesting thing to me. I think I'm switching the conversation right now, but
No, you're not. You're staying on topic.
okay, good.
You're picking up the ball. You're just
So we did
talking
a
about phones.
coaching institute last week in Europe. So I was in Europe, and I went to the airport, and I was going to take a vacation for a week after I did my week of the training.
Oh, nice.
And I got to the airport, and I forgot my phone in the car, the taxi. And so then I got to the airport. I'm going to be gone for a week. I'm not going to have my phone. It was kind of like Gollum in The Lord of the Rings. My precious, where's my phone? And I couldn't believe, in the first couple of days, all the times I went to reach for my phone and what I would use it for, all the different ways I use it, and even trivial stuff. But after a while, I got to where I didn't need it. But there is a sense in which we're addicted to these devices. It literally is addiction. It felt like addiction to have to give it up. So the phone is one big part of it for sure.
The technology companies, they're playing us. I mean, they figured out a way to, tickle your dopamine and just really, really get you hooked. They've hired neuroscientists. There's a reason why you feel jittery.
Yeah, ultimately it felt kind of good not to have it, except when my GPS wasn't working. But other than that, it was it was good. But
I was going to ask you, how was it for you? I mean, did you, after that first withdrawal, how was it for you to be without it?
It was not a problem. I'd say within 2 days. I mean, we did a little study on this where we had a focus group and the people put their phones away. And they all said their lives were better when they didn't use their phone. They would pick times, like somebody was going to drive the Eastern Seaboard with their mother, and they said, I just decided the whole way I'm not going to look at my phone. And I had these beautiful conversations I wouldn't have had if I was looking at whatever I was going to look at. And everybody said that. Everybody in our focus was 8 people. They said putting away your phone is super powerful. They also said it's really, really hard to do. I don't know if I can do it. Like one guy was a grandfather. He said, I'm with my grandson. I want to be fully present. I shouldn't be looking at my phone. He's way more important, but I want to look at my phone. And so people saw the value, but they wrestled with it all the time. For me, I mean, I was taking a break, and it was kind of delightful not to get buzzed all the time and all that stuff. It was fun, and it was beautiful scene. I just have to go on memory now that I don't have any little iPhone photos of my trip, but it was great. So this is going to sound a bit like a leading question, but I can't resist asking this. So one of my thoughts about your book is that it's more than a book about asking questions and listening effectively. It's a book describing a kind of relationship. And I'm wondering if you see it that way. And if so, what's the relationship? What kind of positive relationship is it describing?
That's interesting. I don't know if I've thought about it that way, but maybe I should, because it is actually. I am describing how to be in relation with other human beings. Not only with your intimate relationships, but really anybody you interact with. Because if you don't listen to them, then you won't have a relationship. That's a very interesting way to put it. Because listening it's the first step to having even the briefest relationship with somebody, whether like it's at the grocery counter when you're checking out from the grocery store and talking to the checker for a moment. Just that moment of attunement, it can make all the difference in your and the other person's day just by listening to what they have to say or what they're not saying. and bringing that out, because they want to tell you.
Hmm.
People want to tell you, they want to connect.
Yeah, I wonder if it has, this isn't meant to be a leading question. I'm just thinking out loud, but I wonder if it has to do with power. It's kind of giving, because coercive power is not authentic. So it's giving up power. It's kind of an act of surrender. But in the act of surrender, I have a more authentic experience. And so I have a more real connection with someone if I'm not trying to tell them what to do or where to go or all that kind of stuff. Maybe I'm getting too deep
Or
here,
how
but
great you are.
yeah.
Or how great you are. No, I think that's exactly it. It's this idea of giving over to the other person, but you gain so much.
Yeah, I think and that's really interesting for coaches because it's pretty hard to be a good coach and not come from a place of listening for sure. And that gets to another question I've got here is you contrast hearing and listening. And you say hearing is passive, listening is active. And listening involves using all your senses to process information and find meaning. What would it look like for a coach to do this during a coaching conversation? And our coaches, what they're doing, if they're taking our approach, just to give you a bit of a context, is they're trying to help the other person in a way we will call a partnership, and they're helping the other person unpack what it is they most want to do. It's very much like Miller and Rollnick's motivational interviewing applied to teaching. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're really about helping the person identify what they most want to work on and then partnering with them to pursue it. But the other person kind of drives the car.
Mm-hmm.
So if listening involves using all your senses to process information and find meaning, the coach sat down with a teacher, kind of what would it look like?
Well, I think it would go down to asking a lot of questions, picking up the ball where somebody, when they are speaking, to look for those little Easter eggs in the conversation of things that they've dropped that they don't even realize that they've dropped, to really get at the heart. Because often what people will tell you where they want to go or what they want to do isn't necessarily where they want to go or what they want to do.
Hmm.
And so it's really because when you're in a coaching position, you are the authority figure. You are the one in a powerful position. No matter how much you say this is a partnership, you're the one who is the leader. And so as a result, they're going to want to please you. And so they're going to want to say, and I'm not saying consciously necessarily, but they're going to want to find a way where they feel connected to you, and probably the only way they can think to do that is through approval.
Hmm.
And that's not necessarily where you want them to go. So it's really asking questions after they've said what they want, but really reading what's their body doing. And again, a lot of this is under the hood, because I talk about in the book, there are little things like their color signatures to emotion that we're totally unaware of. And it has to do with the blood flow around the eyes and the face and the chin. And and those change very subtly. So if you're not looking at the person, and people, the research is fascinating because they'll show people neutral faces, but with these color changes. And people will 90% of the time be able to say, oh, that person's sad. Oh, that person's happy. They have no idea why they're saying
Hmm.
that because it's a neutral face. But so there's a lot that you're picking up in the in-person conversation. Now, Zoom gets more difficult because then you don't have like those coloration changes. I mean, you're not going to see that on a monitor, no matter how good your resolution is. And also because people aren't looking at you
Hmm.
on a monitor, they're looking at the camera. So depending on the camera angle, they can look shifty, haughty, subservient. So that gets hard if you're. So my first advice would be to try and be in person because you'll be able to pick those things up. But that's not always. I'm not a Luddite. I love I love my phone. I love everything else. But if I want to really connect with someone, I talk to them like if I'm doing interviews. I generally don't do them over Zoom because it's distracting. I'd rather have less information than faulty information, which is what you get through a video link. And there's also something intimate about somebody next to your ear when you're talking. But it also really has to do with the questions that you ask and what they're not saying, and really getting at the heart of it. And also let them go off. If they do get off topic, I know trying to wrangle them back to the topic at hand is something, and we don't have all day. I get that. But often if you let people divert just for a little bit, it really ends up saving you time in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Because what comes out of people's mouth, the reason why it came to their mind and came out of their mouth is because it has emotional valence. And you will learn a lot about people from their digressions. So I feel like I've actually digressed on answering your question.
That's okay.
But did you have a follow-up to that? Did I answer it?
I think the answer is great. I think the coaching conversation, I think it is, from my perspective, it is all about letting the other person know they're the person in control.
Yeah.
So that famous solution-focused therapy question, if a miracle happened and everything was going your way, what would it look like? The purpose of a question like that is to give the other person power in the conversation. I don't want to know what I think. I want to know what they think. But you're exactly
Mm-hmm.
right. If the person is trying to please you with their responses, then what they say isn't going to be very emotionally compelling, because they're going to go, well, that's not actually what I want. What I really want is this. So it's all the things you're talking about are creating a place where people feel safe to tell you what they really think.
It's building trust.
And if
you can connect with them through listening, it does, as you brought before, it builds trust, because it shows, I'm willing to listen to you diverge a bit, that this isn't all about, I care about you, and I care about you enough to give you my attention, which is, as we've touched on, it's a gift.
And my friend Christian Van Nuremberg, who's a really deep thinker about coaching, and it's a wonderful writer, and he says his mantra as a coach is, it's not about me. I mean, that's what he's trying to communicate in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one thing you said in the book that really got me thinking. And you said the most valuable lesson that you've learned as a journalist is that everybody is interesting if you ask the right questions. If someone's dull or uninteresting, it's on you. And I got thinking about this one. This is real interesting. So tell me more about that. Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Well, I take responsibility when an interview does not go well, because I didn't get to the heart of the story. I didn't get to the heart of them. And it's not that we have to be best friends. It's not that I have to agree to that person with whatever the person has to say. But I need to be able to ask them the questions that get them excited, where I hear that excitement, that emotion in their voice. And that's when you really can start to see the real person. What makes them excited? What gets them to their place where they're comfortable? And often you have to go around Robin Hood's barn sometimes to get there, which we've talked about before. But it is work. Really deep, careful, caring listening is work. And it's not something you can do all the time. And it's something you have to make choices, because you can't do it with everyone. So I do want to emphasize, I have a whole chapter in the book, When to Stop Listening. So I don't want people to think that every conversation has to be like this, because it's kind of like reading. There's some things that you're going to read really carefully and deeply, and other things you're going to skim, because you have to. But if you do really want to get at somebody's story, it really does just start with curiosity. Ask them questions, notice things about them, and be able to reflect that back. And when you are genuinely curious and you do ask them questions, boy, people launch. It's not hard. It's just showing genuine interest. And I'm fortunately pathologically curious, and I'll just ask anything. I think I've never released my inner toddler. I will just ask. And if I am in a very boring conversation, it's generally because the person is reading from their own personal script, and we all have them. It's what you march out, at a cocktail party or when you first meet somebody, and they start giving you their script. And it's your job to knock them off that script, ask them questions. Otherwise, you're just going to listen to some boring old elevator pitch, and it's just going to be a soul-sucking conversation. And it can be anything, really anything. You notice they have on a piece of jewelry that, well, tell me about that. Does that have a story? It always has a story, that necklace, that ring, even, that baseball cap. And particularly if you're at a party, that's the easiest there is you were both, how did you get there? Like, how do you know the host? And there's a story right there, which leads to another story, which leads to another story. Everybody's got a story. And I have never met a person. Now, I won't say I'm not like Will Rogers. I do not like everybody. I do not. But, and also I think Will Rogers was lying. I don't think that's possible. I really don't think that's possible. And that's what makes the people that you truly like, that's what makes it special. If you liked everyone, it wouldn't be special. But that aside, I really think that everyone is interesting. You may not like them, and it also adds to your database of what drives people, how they come to be who they are, and also kind of is in your database of people to avoid in the future if they are people that you realize, okay, that's just not going to work for me.
So you said everybody is interesting if you ask the right questions. And I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about what makes for a good or a bad question.
Well, a bad question presupposes an answer. So any question that starts with, wouldn't you agree, or don't you think, or ends with, right, is not a good question. Because the person's going, again, most people want to connect, or at least for social smoothness will agree, even if they don't really. So you're not going to have an authentic conversation when you ask questions like that, and it will be boring. But a really good question is a question that is a jumping off point that's truly honest and curious and open-ended. And I would advise against any question that starts with why, because why automatically puts people on the defensive. Why did you? Why would you? Then the person feels judged. I would also keep away from questions that aren't genuinely curious, open-hearted, and they're the questions that people always ask you. Stuff like, what do you do for a living? Where do you live? Do you have any kids? Those aren't really so much, I want to get to know who you are as a person. It's more of where to rank you in the social order. And that subconsciously automatically makes people clam up or, revert into that elevator speech or that script. And it really doesn't help you connect with the other person because they know they're judging you at that moment. Okay. What do you do? Where do you live? How much do you make? In the back of your mind, do you have kids? Are you in a relationship? Does anybody love you? That kind of thing. That will make people close down instead of asking something that's, and also I can't emphasize this enough, is intimacy is earned. You can't just launch and say, tell me your story. Tell me everything about you. Tell me, did you have a good relationship with your parents? The intimacy is something that develops, and it's a give and a take. And so you start with more general things. And I love this idea of Parker Palmer talks about this idea of third things. And it's a way for you to back into intimacy. And it's to talk about a third thing that's outside of the two of you that you can connect over, even if it's something like maybe one of you likes and the other person doesn't like. But I also love that quote that's in social science circles, that we're never wrong about what we like or don't like. So getting at people's likes and don't likes, whether, it's a piece of art, what books they're reading, where they like to go when they go on vacation, what they do for fun, or conversely what they hate. That type of thing, those third things will help open the door to greater intimacy, but it's incremental.
Just seems like there's a theme in all of this, which is humility is not the right word exactly, but it is something like humility. You're not forcing your opinions on people, but you're also not ambiguous. You're here's what I've learned, here's what you're not taking over the conversation. You're starting by asking a question and listening. And it all keeps coming back to me to this idea. I guess I'd put it as it sounds like an enormous respect for the individual to make up their own minds about what they want to do and what they think.
I, that's very well said. And I think that's also the same respect that you have when you're listening to another person, that you don't have to agree with them, you don't have to, and they don't have to agree with you to be able to still connect with what they're saying. And just to have that basic respect that they have thoughts and feelings about things and they don't have to be yours. And you don't necessarily have to get to this meeting of the minds other than the meeting of an understanding of where the other person is coming from. And somehow in our culture these days, we have gotten to this distorted sense that you have to be on my side or I can't listen to you. And I just feel that's really destroying us. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because people, you don't have to agree to really listen to another person or
Yeah,
to
Mark.
benefit from listening to that person.
Sorry, I cut you off. You can say that again,
No.
and we'll put Austin to work. We'll have to edit it.
You don't have to agree to listen to another person. I don't even remember what I was. Okay, he's really going to have to do some editing because I don't remember what I was saying.
Well, you can listen to another person and not agree with them. Is really the heart of the matter.
Exactly.
And yeah, Margaret Wheatley. I've been reading her work recently. Her last two books. I really love Turning to One Another. That's one of my favorite communication books. But she essentially says it's fear. These times there's so much misinformation, there's so much polarization. People are walking around frightened, and so they want something solid. And so they get the people in their group and they look for algorithms that support their views and other people that support their views, because taking on things openly from a learning perspective doesn't soothe their fear. But of course, being blind to reality isn't particularly helpful either. But maybe it's because I'm reading her, but that sort of resonates with what you're saying too.
Well, it's this idea of F. Scott Fitzgerald. He wrote the test of a first-rate mind is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. And I think, and we're all so eager to have tidy reasoning and immediate answers. It also has to do with our brains. Our brains take up 20% of take up 2% of our body weight, but eat up 20% of the energy, the calories that we consume. Our brains are incredibly greedy metabolically. And so we're always looking for the shortcut. We're looking for patterns. We're looking for, and it's partially what keeps us alive, but it is something that can be our downfall when we don't want to have to think. It takes a lot of energy to think. And if we can say, okay, I've got that one figured out, it's black or white, and there isn't any nuance there, then we can move on. So, part of it's just our physiology, our biology. But it does close us off from the world and also keeps us from being creative and what they call, in the scientific literature, being cognitively complex, and which is actually related to self-compassion and negatively related to dogmatism.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to kind of exercising that part of your brain and being able to hold those two opposing sides at the same time and being okay with it. That person doesn't agree with me, or that doesn't quite make sense, but that's okay. And I can keep moving on in the world.
Hmm. Well, I love all these ideas. I could talk about this for hours because this is kind of my passion. But I do want to ask, is there something else you wanted to share that we haven't talked about so far?
Well, I guess, right now I'm sort of thinking of worrying a little bit because, again, our polarized culture right now, where when you say listen to people, people feel like, well, I'm not going to listen to, abusive or bigoted people and I guess I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating listening to people who are abusive and who are hurtful. I'm not saying that, but I do think that we've gotten really quick to shut people down before really trying to understand why they behave the way they do. And again, it's not like you have to agree with them, but there is great value in understanding how people became the way they are. And that helps you develop a degree of compassion. And if you can't muster that, it also gives you intelligence about how to deal with them because you know where they're coming from. You don't agree with it, but you know what drives them. And that's how you can steer things when you do have, and we all have to deal with difficult people. So I guess I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying people should take abuse. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I am saying that it is helpful to listen to people that have views that are really different from yours to figure out what they may know that you don't know, or how they got to where they are and how you got to where you are. It's very informative.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking is sometimes people could use your kindness and your compassion against you. They could twist things
Yes.
and they could put it over you. And if you're in that situation, the best thing to do is disengage. It's not about
Yes.
a lack of compassion. You just don't want to put yourself in a place where you're abused. Yeah.
And you shouldn't. And that's why I have a whole chapter about when to stop listening. And that is valid. And it can be valid even if it's just because you're tired and you don't have anything left. And that's okay. That's the limit of human experience. And there are people that you just can't hear. You just don't click with them. And there is a grace to accepting that too. Not everybody's going to like you.
Okay. I feel like we've just started the conversation, which makes me really happy that we get to have another one at the Teaching, Learning, Coaching Conference.
Okay.
I'm going to say it again. My favorite book on listening by a mile, and I have a lot I love. I've learned so much from so many great authors, and I love it not just because of the content, but the content is great. But I love it how it's written. I think it's written beautifully. So I highly recommend it. But I'm also grateful for the conversation and looking forward to the next one. Thanks so
Me
much, Kate.
too.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, great pleasure.